Except it's a guy instead of a girl.
I do not think I'm not good enough. He's not. What? That's like they have a lectureship. She wanted to know if it's not, long before they all would come.
So we're going to be able to use all of this space.
All right.
She's not doing so bad.
Is that, what does that mean?
Okay. Hey, little study group.
Hello, study group.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here. And we have lots of great things to talk about tonight. So we're in Daniel 3. And as we go through the book, I want to keep coming back to the book in its entirety and what is the main point of this book, so that we always keep that in mind. And I get a great feeling of comfort from that, right? Because I don't get bogged down in the details. The details are great, and there's things we'll talk about that are a part of the overall picture of the book. And that's how I want us to see the components in light of that overall purpose, right? And so that's what we're going to be doing, and I'll just keep right on hammering that one, and so I'll stop and I won't hammer it anymore tonight. Steve, want to lead us in a prayer? Get going. Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this peaceful time that we have together
Yes.
this evening to join ourselves together and to consider this portion of the book of Daniel. And Heavenly Father, we're just so grateful for all of your word delivered to us. And Father, truly do believe that this book is written that we might know you, and that we might know you at a very intimate level.
Yes.
And just pray, Heavenly Father, that we can be impressed by having a God that we serve who so earnestly desires that we know about him. And just pray, dear Father, that we can grow in our appreciation of our Father. And pray that you will open our eyes this evening
Yes, Lord.
as we study from this portion of your word, that we can truly see what's contained in your word here. So grateful for everyone who's here tonight, and especially grateful for Honey that she took of her time to come and be with us for a bit. And
Amen.
pray that you'll bless Chad as he's not feeling the best right now. Just pray that you'll heal him, and pray that you'll be with he and Honey and the work that they do in your service. Thank you so much, dear Father, for Jesus our Savior, and ask you to hear this prayer and receive it in his name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so, what am I missing? I'm missing, this. There it is. So we're not going to go through this in any detail, but I just wanted to kind of remind us of what we did last week in this chiasm idea here, and just kind of looking at the book and how we have these mirrors, and then comes down to the kind of the center of it that gives us the point. So we talked, chapter 1, prologue, chapter 12, the epilogue, chapter 2, prophecies about the kingdom, chapter 11, prophecies about the kingdom, chapter 3, God's people in suffering, chapter 10, God's people in suffering, chapters 4 and 5, prophecies about the fall of the king, chapter 9b, prophecies about the fall of the king, Chapter 6, God's people in suffering again. 9a, the same. And then chapter 7, prophecies of beasts in Aramaic. And then chapter 8, prophecies of beasts in Hebrew. And so we have this mirroring back and forth. And so we said that the center of it is found in Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And this is where the vision that Daniel had of one like a son of man coming up to the Ancient of Days and receiving a scepter and a kingdom. So we've talked about the fact that the main point is that God is in control. No matter what's going on, God is in control. And then underlying that, well, who is this? Well, this is the king, coronated by the Father. He is the king over his kingdom. He is the one that's in control, right? And so this is going to be important. You'll see even more why that point is so important, because this is not just for Daniel and his 3 friends and whatever faithful Jews are in captivity, but it's for the Jews who come out of Babylonian captivity, who are still going to be experiencing fiery trials, as we're going to see tonight in this 3rd chapter. And so we'll talk a bit about that in a while. So as we kind of get into the chapter then, chapters 3 and 4 are going to present a crisis of faith and integrity and loyalty. This chapter is going to be very much about loyalty, okay, where our loyalties lie, and the fact that the world, the forces in the world demand your loyalty, and we have to decide who we're going to give that loyalty to. And we're going to see a stark graphic example of that here in these chapters. Okay, and so we're going to be talking about those things. So in chapter 2, with the interpretation of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar on the part of God through Daniel, we saw God's wisdom. And so Nebuchadnezzar had called all of his wise men, and all the wisdom of Babylon could not give that dream and its interpretation. But Daniel assured them that there was a God. Oh, that door must be locked. That there's a God in heaven. That they moved on. So I don't know if any more are going to try to come in there. They'll be over here in a second. There's a God in heaven that could do that. And so in that 2nd chapter, we saw the God's wisdom. Here in chapter 3 and in chapter 4, we're going to see God's power. All right? And again, remembering that there is going to be people besides the characters that are brought forth in this chapter who are going to need these examples and need this perspective or perception of God that's being presented here, okay, and his wisdom and his power. And we'll see how those kind of things are going to pan out. So in Daniel 3, we have some parallels that we just want to look at, and which are going to explain to a certain degree some of the things that we're going to be seeing on the part, especially of Nebuchadnezzar. So in chapter 2, we have the head of gold. Chapter 3, we have an image of gold. Okay? And of course, you look at that and you say, well, Daniel said you are the head of gold, and then in the 3rd chapter, he's gonna put up an image of gold and say, worship that. Okay, I wonder if there's any connection between that. Chapter 3:7, all the people bowed down and worshiped that idol. Okay? And then in chapter 3, verse 18, these 3 young men say, we will not. Okay? So everybody's bound down, and they're saying, well, we're not going to do it. Okay? Chapter 2:12, the king was angry and very furious. All right? And we'll talk about that again. And then chapter 3:13, then Nebuchadnezzar in furious rage, and he was filled with fury. Well, what's going on with him? Okay, what's this attitude of, blowing up and getting mad about things? Chapter 3:15, who is the God who can deliver you, right? And it's they say our God who we serve is able, okay? And so we're going to ask a question as we start out as to, how long has it been since the praise of God that we see on Nebuchadnezzar's part in chapter 2, verse 47, and his saying, well, who is the God that can deliver you? Well, wait a minute, who was the God that interpreted that dream? And now he seems to have forgotten about that. All right. So chapter 2:46, that's where he fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel, and then in chapter 3, verse 24, he's going to be astonished at something that happens here. So and I want you to look at this from the standpoint of the people who are going to be benefiting by these accounts, that are going to have these accounts, and they're going to and keep them in mind, because these chapters are just full of things that are of a nature that people that are suffering can get a great deal of strength from, and courage. Yeah, and that's what this is about. There's a king in heaven, and he is in control of all things, and just really fascinating. So we'll see. So the question then, how much time has elapsed between chapter 2, verse 47, where he's praising the God of Daniel, and the events of chapter 3? It's thought that, and with reason, I think at least it would be reasonable that it would be thought that it would be some kind of a period of time has gone by. Don't know how long, but at least given him an opportunity to, I don't know, it seems like he forgot. How does that hit you? That you think he would forget about, or maybe he's caught up in his thinking, and he's just not, it's not like so much time's gone by that he forgot it ever happened, but things are happening now that have got him caught up in a certain way of thinking, and I think that's what's going to be borne out, all right? So certainly he can represent for us the world, because the world is under the power of the evil one, John says, the God of this world and the sons of disobedience and all that we read about in the New Testament. So there is a ruler in this world, and we're going to see some. Okay, I had some more here, did I? Okay. All right, so let's get into the text here a little bit. Now, first of all, the plain of Dura here was probably a spot about 6 miles south of Babylon. Massive square of brick construction can still be seen there, 14 meters square by 6 meters high, which may have served as the pedestal for a part of this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. It's likely, people talk about, commentators muse over, well, if this thing was solid gold, the amount of money that would be, and I don't know how limited Nebuchadnezzar's finances may have been or not been, but it's thought that it was probably overlaid with gold, kind of like the mercy seat, but that's just kind of a sidelight. And so here they're out on this plain. He sets up this image here. Now, there's something interesting, and I think that we miss this a lot of times, and this really has a bearing on Nebuchadnezzar's rage and the situation that these young men are in, okay? And it's kind of strange, but let's just look at this. And I think this is probably, I wouldn't doubt that when you've read this chapter, you've kind of went, oh, okay. This is what I mean. Right? Why in the world? You know, so in these passages, you know where these are, right? So counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, officials, all the provinces, and all these guys, right? So, yeah. And then in verse 2, and then in verse 3, same thing. Goes over the whole list of them again, right? Let's see here. So, so he goes over these and over these and over these same things, okay? If you notice here, and I put these verses up there so I don't get confused. So here it is again. So when you hear the sound of the horn, so we've got twice he gives these treasures, all these different offices, twice, repeats them, every one of them individually again. And then he says, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, and he repeats that like 3 times, right? So what is the point? Why that repetition? So here's an idea that through repetition, the narrator creates a scenario in which conformity is normative, disobedience is unthinkable. This is it. Particularly, this is what's happening. Okay? These are the people. This is what's happening. This is the music. These are the instruments. And he repeats it and repeats it to make the point. You do not deviate. This is the king's decree, right? Disobedience is unthinkable. Well, I guess it's not unthinkable by everybody, but if you're going to think disobedience and you're not going to obey in that atmosphere, somebody's going to bite the bullet. That's not going to be let go, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress here. And so when it comes to this commandment to, when you hear those instruments play, to bow down and worship that statue, the people in the general populace will have no problem with that. They're polytheists anyway. They worship more than one God, okay? And so the idea of bowing down to another one, you know, or bowing down to a statue, that's not going to bother them. And they do it, okay? And so he's gathered people here from all over Babylon, all these different political, government people that have their assignments around the empire, and they've all come here. And they're all bowing down. The text told us, you know, they all bowed down to that image, okay? And they didn't have a problem, all right? So that's important, yeah, as we kind of superimpose these Jewish young men upon the circumstances. Yeah, Lisa?
My thoughts is tangential question, and maybe you covered it last week when I was gone, but this idea that Daniel wrote this Shayazna made me think about all the writers in the Bible and how many like literary devices are used
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
And it never really occurred to me before that most of those people, like most people in our time who write literary devices are people who write for a living. That's their job, right?
Mhm.
They learn how to do that. But we have lots of examples of people in the Bible who write their books that have no, for lack of a better word, English training. Like that's not, Daniel's not a writer, right?
Right?
I mean, maybe Solomon was, he was into the arts, but King David wasn't.
Mhm.
Right? So do we think that all these literary devices that are used in the Bible are God-breathed in the sense that he had them, he blessed them with the ability to write in literary devices?
Well, I would have no doubt about that, because if they didn't have that background to know that that's what they're doing, and every word that they're writing is inspired. You think about the apostles where Jesus said, hey, don't worry about what you're going to say. Don't even give it a second hand. Don't think about it beforehand. You don't have to worry. The Spirit will give you in that hour what you're to say. So if this is how God revealed it to them, and they wrote it down that way, then it's just the glory of God, and it's even more fascinating, you know, because God, the way that he communicates, you know, in this way. Now, we talked last week about the Eastern and particularly Jewish way of handling these Jewish scriptures that were written to Jewish people, and how they look at these things way differently. Okay, so one of the things that I'm learning is that when they study these scriptures, that, for instance, they will take a passage, say like this passage here in Daniel 3, and they want to know what the problems are. In other words, what doesn't make sense? You know, why did they do all these repetitions? That doesn't make sense. You know, why does this time? Or I guess I'm going into chapter 4. But Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and he wants somebody to give him the dream and the interpretation, but he tells Daniel the dream. Why do you do that? Okay? And so, in other words, you look at the text and you look at things that it doesn't seem to make sense. And that the purpose of that is to draw you in to the text. You see that? It's to draw you in. So instead of just reading on a surface, you're looking at it first and going, this doesn't make sense and that doesn't make, well, why this and why that? Not that you're going to necessarily be able to answer it at the moment, but it draws you into the text. That's just a different way of looking at it, right? So that's why I put up some of these things that I do. They're like these different comparisons and looking at, you know, these parallels and things like that to kind of draw us in there so that we're looking for things and we want answers to things. And where's the answer lie? All right? So that's my answer to that question. Okay, Steve?
So I sure go along with you that there is an obvious, what's the word I'm looking for? There's certainly something going on in the Bible other than each individual author just,
Yeah.
you know, and the one that pops out to me, and you know, call it coincidence, call it whatever you want to, but the number of books in the Old Testament, 39,
Mm-hmm.
number of books in the New Testament, 27, is you could take those numbers and superimpose them over the top of the book of Isaiah, and right about chapter 40,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right about chapter 40, you sort of shift
Mm-hmm.
from seeing what's going on as in the moment
Mm-hmm.
to seeing it looking forward to God.
Mm-hmm.
Old Testament, New
Yeah,
Testament,
matches, yeah.
stuff like that, and it's
Yeah.
all over the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
just says to me that the Holy Spirit had his hand
Oh, man.
everywhere in this.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And so then to me, it isn't a leap at all that perhaps Daniel wasn't particularly skilled, you know, in literary, you know, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but he had some help,
Oh, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just really believe that, and in fact, I think that, to me, that's a faith builder.
Yeah.
When you see that kind of thing going on, and inevitably you have to say to yourself, wow, this
Mhm.
Bible is something
Mm-hmm.
like I've never read before.
It is, yeah. See, and when we just make the effort to say, okay, we have a certain way of looking at it, and that's why the Jewish people, you know, I've heard that, you know, who do you think you are to interpret our scripture? You know, it's like, because and I understand, because they look at it in a completely different way than we look at it. I mean, what is it like to be educated as a Jewish child from the time you're a child in the Hebrew language and the Old Testament and the nuances I don't know, and I'll never know that. Okay? Now, if I was like 20 years younger, I'd be on a quest. I'm going to find out, But that's all I'm saying. So the best that we can do is recognize that, there's like last week we talked about looking in from a different window. If you stand there and look in the window, what you're seeing is accurate, but you go look in a different window, you're going to see the same scene, but it's not going to be the same. You're going to see things you couldn't see from that one. That's all we're trying to do, to bring that balance into it. So we have a better, a deeper understanding of what God's doing here, right? So that's why it's so important to keep in mind what the purpose, the central purpose, what's God getting at? Because all the things that we see happening are feeding into that central purpose, okay? All right. Okay, so it's okay. I'm just having fun. Yeah. Okay. So the people were polytheists, and they didn't have a problem bowing down to that, particular image. So let's go back in the text again. All right. And so he's given the law. He's given the commandment here. Like in verse 6, whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Okay, and then here he goes again. As soon as the people heard the sound of the horn, and just says the whole list again, right? To make that point, there's no deviation from this. I'll repeat it, and I'll repeat it, and I'll repeat it, so you understand. This is how it has to be. Okay, now you think about that as a backdrop, and if you were a Jew who has come out of Babylonian captivity into the period between the Testaments, and Daniel is going to describe a lot of suffering that the people of God are going to face in that period between the Testaments. And here you have a situation where you have a ruler, and they're going to be dealing with Antiochus Epiphanes and the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Okay, and we'll get into that stuff when we get there. But they're going to be dealing with these things, And remember that this is the period of time that spawned the Hasmonean revolt. The Maccabees, they were revolting against some things that, hey, this is not going on anymore. Okay, so they're going to be facing some things. And when you look at this backdrop, and here's this ruler, okay, and they're going to be dealing with rulers. And this ruler that says, this is how it is, and if you don't do it like I say it is, then I'm going to burn you alive, okay? Okay, so there's a place to start. That's the similarity between the situations, that they can look here and look at their situation, okay? All right, and so now in chapter 3, down at verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the, okay, and we'll go to verse 11. But you see how they approach him, though? Exactly as he said, okay? And does not fall down and worship, verse 11, shall be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have anointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Now, there's a lot in that sentence, okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, paid no attention to you. Okay, now let's think about, we look at those verses where Nebuchadnezzar is furious, right? I mean, just absolutely furious beside himself, okay? And here they come to him and say, they're not paying attention to you, right? These Jews. And said, they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, okay, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought to him. So they brought these men before the king. Now, one question we could ask here that maybe an obvious question is, where's Daniel? Okay? Daniel's kind of like, would he skip town? Was he so loyal that he didn't have to, was he looked at as so loyal to the king that he doesn't have to prove his loyalty? Is he out on business? Nobody knows. It would be conjecture to say, but the fact is that, he's missing right now. All conjecture. And so this statement by DB, though not explicitly stated, it appears that the Chaldeans were motivated by professional jealousy, right? So we see here in verse 12. So they can these certain Jews whom you have appointed over the provinces of Babylon, Jews, foreigners, and you've appointed them over the provinces of Babylon. What's motivating them? Because it appears that if not for these Chaldeans ratting them out, so to speak, they probably would have gotten away with it. Just go about their business and, maybe nothing would have come. But these individuals are not going to let that stand, right? And so the young men had shown themselves superior to the wise men of Babylon, as recorded in chapter 1. You got to kind of put yourself there. They outdid them, 10 times better. All right, so these foreigners come in, cream of the crop, and start outperforming these guys right away. All right, they go to school, they're just blowing everybody away, and they're getting promoted. They're on a fast track, and so it's not, even though not explicitly stated, it's not far-fetched that their motivation is pretty transparent. And now these foreigners are on the fast track to higher ranks in the government. All right. So as we go into begin at chapter 3, verse 13. So Nebuchadnezzar is in a furious rage. Commanded that these young men be brought to him. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I've set up? Now, if you are ready to hear the sound of here we go again, okay, very specific, okay, don't leave one of those instruments out and don't add another one to it, right? If you're ready to do that, and bow down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. We're good. But if you do not worship the image I have made, if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Okay. So, first of all, the way that the Chaldeans approached Nebuchadnezzar with this made it that it was really easy to predict his response because they're appealing to his vanity. Okay? These Jews, they're not paying attention to you. They're not worshiping your gods. They're not bowing down and worship your God. They're disregarding you, O king. All right? The greatest power on earth. Okay? And they're not listening to you. They're not paying any attention to you. Don't we get kind of irritated when people don't pay attention to us? Right? If we think they should. And they're not. All right? So this is what I meant by perhaps this is not a matter of Nebuchadnezzar like forgetting what happened back in chapter 2 and his praise of Daniel's God. But he's caught up in his, he's the head of gold, and I'm going to put this gold statue out there, and everybody's going to bow down to it because I'm the golden one, right? And these young men are saying, no, you're not. As far as we're concerned, okay? Yeah, Kevin?
This is a comment I passed up on a while back, and I kind of just wanted to tie on a few things.
Okay.
Right at the beginning in Daniel, and it's talking about him being taken to Babylon, it specifically to the land of Shinar in Babylon.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is really reminiscent of in Genesis. I'm sorry, I have the passage pulled up.
All right.
Genesis 10, kind of giving the descendants of Ham, who is the sinful son,
Mm-hmm.
and Ham fathered all these enemy nations that we hear about later on, like Egypt and Canaan. But one of them is Cush, and Cush fathers Nimrod. And Nimrod's described as, we know he's the founder of the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
And he's described as a mighty hunter, and they say that he's a mighty hunter before Yahweh. They're describing him as he is so heroic and mighty that he is better than God. And he founds Babel and then builds a tower that is better than God. And this is in the land of Shinar. Daniel starts with this idea that they are taken to the land of Shinar. So they're taken to this place that sets themselves up before God. And then that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar is doing.
Mm.
He remembers what happened before with the God of Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
But he is saying, there is no God before me.
Yeah, he will basically do that. Yeah. Okay, interesting parallel. Interesting parallel. I like this. Yeah. So, you know, we're gonna pull these scriptures apart and really take a look at them. See, as we progress going through. Very good. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar, and we see with the passage here, and so he's enraged, and like I said, his response was predictable given the way that these young men approached him. Now, you know, the whole premise of things here is this enforced worship of the statue, okay? But what is the purpose of why does he want them to bow down to that statue? He's had the statue constructed. He's put it out here on the plain of Dura. He's told everybody to, when they hear this music, you bow down to the statue which I have made. So he's connected himself to that statue, right? And so if they bow down to that statue which he has made, then they are being asked to display their loyalty to him who made that statue. That makes sense? Okay. So this is a test of loyalty. Now, when we come to the young men here, and I'm, you know, instead of going over the three names all the time, that's who I'm talking about, the young men. When we come to these young men here, now he's called them into his presence, and this is now a personal test of their loyalty. You show your loyalty to me by bowing down and worshiping my God, okay, or worshiping my gods and, you know, what I've set up, which, you know, going back to Kevin's point, you know, who's really God here, you know, but we'll get to that. Then everything's fine, okay? And so show your loyalty to me, right? But now on the other side of it, we have the ideas of integrity and faithfulness on their part. And so are they going to maintain their integrity and their faithfulness toward God, or are they going to not? And that's just where they're at right now. So now, another interesting question about the text is the fact that we know that a lot of people, a lot of Jews died at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Lots and lots of them, but not these ones. So why did God spare these four, really? Because, you know, don't forget about the lion's den, right? So he spares the life. He intervenes, directly intervenes, to spare the life of these men when so many other Jews died. Okay? So why is that? You know, one answer to that question can be because that's what he chose to do. You know, he shows mercy to whom he shows mercy. That's his wisdom, that's his decision, and we are not to, who are we to question that? Okay, that's one, you know, and that's a true thing. That's his choice, and he can make whatever choice he wants to make. On the other hand, why are they in exile in the first place? Because of sin. And so they're paying the consequences. The prophets came to them over and over again and say, hey, you straighten up. If you don't, this is what's going to happen to you. And God pled with them and pled with them, you know, until, as the history writer says, there was no remedy. Can't recall specifically if that phrase is referring to Israel in the north or Judah in the south, but the same, it's still true. You know, until I can't do anything more for you. So that's certainly a reason to. And then, of course, the example that the people that go into the period between the testaments are going to have, those who come out of captivity. And so from a national perspective, they were certainly suffering the consequences of sin. Comments, questions? Okay. So I want you to notice their answer here in verse 16. And he says, Shadrach, the young man, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Well, first of all, what if they had gone into a lengthy explanation as to why they haven't bowed down? Do you think he cares? Okay. Oh yeah. See, I mean, that's what I'm saying. So he's into this thing. I mean, you know, we're not privy as we sit here in this class and discuss this to all the mechanisms and everything and the efforts and the work and all that went into building that thing. And all the while what he's thinking about himself and what his intention for that is. And I'm going to put this thing up and people are going to bow down to it and they're going to give me honor. Okay? And so there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes here. But so a lengthy explanation, he's probably not going to want to hear that in the first place, in his state of mind. So he's out of control. Okay, they're not going to change his mind. All right, so it's pointless to do that. But in verse 17, if this is so, now their answer here is bold, but not belligerent. You know, they're not standing up and saying, we don't have to do what you said. No, they're just being very matter of fact and very reminiscent of Daniel's response to Nebuchadnezzar's order to kill all of the wise men. And he goes to Arioch and says, hey, what's going on here? Why is it such an urgent matter? What's happening? You know, so he goes and he shows that discretion and that wisdom and just, you know, so you kind of see this in these young men. They don't panic, you know. And Nebuchadnezzar is going to say something about them when this comes to a head here at the end that will just resonate and it'll make perfect sense. So I say that to confuse you and make you wonder what I'm talking about. I like doing that. So, all right. So now as we, they're not going to do it. So they say, verse 17, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Okay? We're not going to do it. No matter what happens. Now, now think about who's going to be benefiting by this. See, no matter what happens, no matter what you threaten, no matter what the consequences are, we're going to serve God. Okay? And when we start talking about the Maccabees later, you'll see that very spirit. You know, in fact, they're in Daniel 10. Those who know their God will display strength and take action. that she's looking forward to what's going to happen when the people come out of Babylonian captivity, okay? So we'll talk about more of that later. It gets very thrilling, okay? Very thrilling. So again, Nebuchadnezzar, filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against these young men. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. So that just means really, 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 really hot. Okay. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind them and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, tunics, hats, other garments. They were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Now, because the king's order was urgent, the furnace overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Okay, so there's the scene. And so he just threw them in there. Okay, so here's your consequences, and there they go. So they're in there. And then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. I mean, he's watching this, and rose up in haste. He stands up really fast and he declares his count. Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered the king, true. Okay. He answered, said then, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Right? So people kind of automatically go, oh, that was Jesus. That was the Word, But just let's just start with Nebuchadnezzar first. Okay? In Nebuchadnezzar's mind, gods had children. Okay? It could be of the higher gods, and they have children, or promiscuous behavior by some of the more immoral gods in the whole pantheon. But that wasn't a strange thing to him. That was like son of the gods, okay? Not the son of God. It's not, what he's saying there. No, it's saying like a son of the gods. Now, what have we learned from our angel study about beings who are dispatched to minister to those who are to inherit salvation? Okay? And it's interesting, another question that we could add is in verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants. Well, how does he know about God sending angels? And so we asked the question, is not to answer them, just to ask it. How did where did he get that from? Okay, is that, is there an explanation for that, or But we know from Hebrews 1:14, we shouldn't be surprised that and in fact, I think in the Daniel's den, in the lion's den, pretty sure that now don't correct me if I'm wrong, but that God sent his angel. Okay, so I'm just recalling off the top of my head right now, but so from his point of view, that wasn't unusual for him to say the appearance is like a son of the gods. Okay, yes.
An interesting thing is that in my New King James it says son of God, and I wonder if that's just
How is it? Is it like capital S?
and capital G.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Well, now we have to ask the question: what does he know about the Son of God? If that Son of God,
Same question.
yeah, what does he know about that? So that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, so when something doesn't make sense, what we want to do is say, oh, is there some explanation for this that I'm not seeing, embedded in here somewhere, right? But at this point in time, yeah, Kevin.
From my own understanding, studying some of like the Eastern perspective,
Mm-hmm.
was that they would have viewed all spiritual beings as gods of some sort or another.
Yes.
And are going to be sons of God.
Mhm.
We have that phrasing all the way back in the beginning of Genesis again.
Mhm.
The sons of God saw the daughters of man, and so it's making this distinction. And you have this, and sons of God comes up a bunch of different times in the Old Testament, but then you have a big distinction change when you get to the New Testament that we can become called sons of God.
Mhm.
And so it's still drawing on that same imagery that we can be elevated to that role. But I'm along the same lines with you. There's no reason. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar was thinking this is Jesus. I think he's looking at it and saying this is a spiritual
Yeah,
being
it's a spiritual being.
from
Mhm.
the gods.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I mean, from
obviously from the three men's God, because he just said
yeah,
he will deliver them.
yeah. So see, with a translation like that, see, it makes me want to, makes me wish that I could ask those translators, why specifically did you put that in there that way? You know? I mean, they'd be coming out of Nebuchadnezzar's mouth, like the Son of God, and you're going to capitalize it that way. If they didn't capitalize it, then we could say, okay, well, maybe that's just a different way of expressing a son of the gods. But to put it like that and to deliberately capitalize those words to identify that with Yahweh and the Son of God, I don't know. That doesn't make, that doesn't compute for me at this point. Now, who knows? Later it may, but right now it does not. Okay? All right. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
So, in this verse right here, and the appearance of the fourth is, in my translation, English Standard,
Mm-hmm.
and the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. The gods thing is sort of what I'm grabbing hold of a little bit. It doesn't necessarily follow in this translation that Nebuchadnezzar is recognizing that this is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All he is recognizing is there's somebody in there who's walking around acting like a god, and we have all kind of gods,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Just a son of the God.
Specifically that it's
Mm-hmm.
the God Most High in this passage, doesn't he?
Well, I guess it depends.
There's several verses in one of the things he says is God Most High, right?
It might depend on the translation. My English Standard just says a son of the gods.
Yeah. So where Nebuchadnezzar praises Daniel's God, I think he uses that kind of terminology, where something has been manifested that demonstrates the superiority of Daniel's God or these young men's God over.
Well, that's the only observation I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Is that there's nothing here that talks about that person, the fourth person in there, being Daniel's God.
Right. Just a son of the gods. Okay. So one like a son of the God.
In that verse I just read.
Yeah.
In verse 26, he says to the three of them, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So but I still think that goes to show he's acknowledging that, because he just made the statement that no God can save.
Exactly.
And now he's saying, oh, wow, your God must be higher.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or any of the other gods.
Yeah. What God is able. So he doesn't have any confidence that any of the gods that he knows of are able to do this. You guys are cooked, no pun intended, or maybe intended. Yeah. Okay. So all right. So let's look here then, and in verse 27, the satraps, governors, kings, counselors gathered together and saw the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, no smell of fire had come upon them. In fact, the only thing that burned were the bounds, the things that were binding them. Those are the only things that burned.
And the
Right.
guys that tried to throw him in.
Well, those guys too, yeah, yeah. Let's not forget those guys.
Never get down.
Yeah, yeah. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel You know, and we just look at that as a messenger. Okay, he sent a messenger, an angel, and delivered his servants, listen, who trusted in him. There it is. See? They trusted him. And they trusted him no matter what happened, whether they burned up in that fire or whether they didn't burn up. They trusted him. And I think it's extraordinary that Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that. They trusted in him. Now, boy, see, this stuff is all setting us up for what's coming later, right? And when you think about the central theme of this book and you think about the situation that the people coming out of captivity, going into the period between the testaments are going to face, trust God. He's in control, okay? You see that vision. Boy, that one like a son of man going up and receiving the scepter in the kingdom. God, he's got this, okay? He is in control, okay? And so he yielded up their bodies rather than served and worshiped any God except their own God. That's a lot of trust, okay? Just yield up their bodies, all right? What a example, what an example to live up to, to trust God that much, it's like it's easy to trust him when things are, when things are easy, when things are, but what about when they're hard, real hard, Therefore, verse 29, I make a decree, any people, nation, language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. So first of all, is whoever bows down, does not bow down to the image, this is what's going to happen to him, word for word. See? And now, whoever doesn't recognize Daniel's God, not the image, Daniel's God, I'm going to do the same thing to him. So that means that the faithfulness of these young men changed Nebuchadnezzar's point of view. Because at first, if you don't bow down to this idol, I'm going to do this to you. And now, if you bow down to any God except the God of Daniel, I'm going to do the same thing to you. Their faithfulness made a difference. So they didn't just say, well, hey, guys, we're only three of us. What are we going to do? What impact can we have? So we may as well we can be more effective if we just go along with it. It's not, we know there's only one God. We don't have to prove anything to him, and they bow down and do that. But see, it goes back to why were these men's lives spared? Because God's got some people he needs to teach. And he's using these young men to teach future generations that are going to need these lessons and need this encouragement and need this strength and example. Okay, so there's another reason that we might say, it seems obvious to me that he saved them because of what we have written here, and because of the central theme of this book, and because of the people who are going to benefit by it, right? Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the province, or in the province of Babylon. So now, there they go. They're being promoted. So the Chaldeans trying to tear them down, get them destroyed, and they end up being promoted. Didn't work, Now, how many examples of this can we find in the Bible where somebody tried to harm the people of God and ended up benefiting them? Right? Yeah, Steve?
You can sure hear parallels of Esther going on here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the pivot point around the book of Esther is that if Esther had not turned the tide, the Jews were in serious trouble of being wiped away, right?
Yeah.
And rather than being wiped away, this pivot in history, they became stronger,
Oh, yeah.
much stronger.
Yeah.
So you see this twist in the road, all the way through the Old Testament scripture.
Yeah.
Always, kind of getting back to what we were talking about, always heading back
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. So if I perish, I perish, right? Yeah, and so a couple of things before we end tonight that we learned is first of all, faith does not exempt people from suffering. It does not exempt you from suffering. So people later on that are going to be reading this, that are trying to be faithful to God, and they're suffering at the same time. You know, some of us need to learn that lesson, don't we, when things get hard and we're suffering and then we want to get mad at God. Well, why would God let me go through this? You know, I'm faithful to him. What he owes you something? Job, yeah, you know, because you've been faithful, so he owes you an easier time. You know, Hebrews 12 that we're going into, do not faint when you are at the discipline of the Lord. Anyway, I digress. One last screen here. Revelation 2:10, be faithful until death. You know that passage, you receive the crown of life. Okay, so there's always been tension between the demands of the lords of this world and the duty we owe to God. Okay? In Revelation, the saints had to choose between loyalty to Caesar or loyalty to Jesus Christ. Okay? Even if they had to die. Okay? And he was so careful and clear that even if you die, the Lord has not abandoned you. Be faithful unto death. Okay? And you will receive a crown of life. That death isn't stopping anybody, right? So, yeah, so there's a little, you know, we'll be dipping up into Revelation as we go through here and making some parallels. Okay, because we'll see things being fulfilled in Revelation that were prophesied here by Daniel. And with that, thank you very much, and class is dismissed.
Good thoughts.
Yeah.